All right, boys and girls, welcome back to Wednesday e-learning for social studies. We're going to jump in and we're going to learn about some other people groups and things that were going on during the American Revolution or the Revolutionary War. Just going to jump into it. African Americans, free and enslaved. At the start of the war, 1 of every 5 people in the 13 colonies was of African descent. Some free African Americans had set up communities in northern cities such as Philadelphia. However, the majority of African Americans lived enslaved, mostly in the South. In Elijah of Buxton, we read the difference of being free and enslaved. Obviously, you all know the difference to the two. The further north in the colonies, there were more free Africans. Further south in the colonies, there were more enslaved Africans. And we know that because of the amount of farms and things, logistically why. Again, not agreeing with anything, condoning anything, but that's the big separator between the North and the South was the amount of farmland and the people that the plantation owners and stuff wanted working on them. The promise of freedom. Close to 5,000 enslaved African Americans fought for the Continental Army. Many were promised their freedom as a reward for their service. This promise was made to the soldiers of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. James Armistead, an enslaved person from Virginia, was a spy for George Washington. The information that Armistead collected helped the Americans win an important battle at Yorktown, Virginia. After the war was over, the Virginia government gave Armistead his freedom. The British governor of Virginia promised freedom to all enslaved people who fought for the British. His group of more than 300 African American soldiers wore patches that said "Liberty to Slaves." All right, a lot happening here. Both sides of the battle were promising African Americans freedoms if they would fight for them. Some were fighting for the colonists. Some were fighting for the British. Either way, they were doing this because they were promised that they would no longer be in slavery after the war was over if they did this. Seems like a good deal. We'll see if that comes true. Obviously, for Mr. Armistead, it worked. Free African Americans in battle. These are the colonists that these are the African American that are colonists that are already free. Free African Americans also took sides. Peter Salem was among at least 5 African Americans who fought the British at the Battle of Concord. He also fought at Bunker Hill. James Forten from Philadelphia was just 14 years old when he joined the Continental Navy. And so this is just saying that some of the colonists up north that were African American, they fought for the colonists. And that was on their, they wanted to. They weren't given anything. They just wanted to because they believed in it. And they were free anyway because they were living further north. People in the West. Sorry, I thought I skipped a page. Oh, I can't. Let me go over here. Sorry, guys. When the war began, many Native Americans remained neutral. Most white settlers in the West, or the lands west of the Appalachian Mountains, also remained neutral. Native Americans were soon divided by the war. Many groups eventually sided with the British. In 1777, the Mohawk agreed to help the British. The Mohawk leader, Thayendanegea, also known as Joseph Brant, hoped to stop settlers from moving west. Groups such as the Oneida and Tuscarora fought for the Americans. The feelings of many Western settlers also changed. Many did not support the Patriot cause, but they wanted to help drive the British out of their lands. All right, so at this point in time, the Native Americans have already been kicked out of their lands and pushed further west. Most of them just stayed away from it because they didn't want to help the colonists that just kicked them out of their lands. And they didn't really want to help the British either. Now, some of them did help the British because they thought that maybe that would stop the colonists and they would have more land. Other ones, vice versa. So they were picking sides. The biggest thing is they wanted land. And right now, their best bet was probably protecting the land that they now have further west. Their thought process was, well, they fight over that land over there, they'll just stay over there, and we'll be okay here. Kind of weird. Obviously, it doesn't play out that way. They keep getting driven off their land. But at that point in time, that was kind of the decisions that they were making. Comparing armies. In July 1775, George Washington arrived in Massachusetts to take command of the Continental Army. The soldiers had no uniforms, only their everyday clothes. Many had no guns, so they carried spears and axes. Some had fought in the French and Indian War, but most had no military training. Many were farmers who just enlisted or signed up to fight. Washington was once so angry that he threw his hat on the ground and shouted, "Are these the men which I am to defend America?" Keeping the army fed and clothed took a lot of supplies. Washington told Congress that his army needed 100,000 barrels of flour and 20 million pounds of meat a year. Congress could not raise enough money to pay for everything the army needed. So at the picture at the top, you can kind of see the differences between the two armies. A lot of the people that were in the Patriot side, the colonist side, they had no military background. They were workers. They were farmers. That's what they knew. They had zero military experience. Most of them didn't have weapons. They carried their axe. And so it was a tough order for George Washington to look at these men and say, these are the men that I have to fight with, that we are expected to win with. They don't even know anything about fighting in a military. So the deck was kind of stacked against them. The British had experience and the colonists didn't. A strong enemy. The Continental Army went to war against one of the most powerful armies in the world. The British Army was made up of experienced soldiers. The British had about 50,000 soldiers in the colonies. Washington rarely had more than 15,000 soldiers in his army at any time. British, 50,000. The Patriots or the colonists, 15,000. 50,000 to 15,000. 50,000 experience, 15,000's no experience. The British Army also used mercenaries or hired soldiers because many of the mercenaries came from a German region called Hesse-Kassel. Americans called them Haitians. But the British had problems too. It was hard to fight a war 3,000 miles from home. Loyalists gave some aid, but the British soldiers still had to wait a long time for supplies and soldiers to replace them. So not only was it British soldiers, they hired mercenaries. These are hired military men to come and fight for them. But the big problem was they were 3,000 miles away from home. They did get homesick, but they also had to wait on their supplies 3,000 miles to get there. So there was a lot of things that they were dealing with. All right, boys and girls, head to Schoology and answer your questions for Wednesday. I'll see you tomorrow.